Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon, and I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And today we're going to be talking about pairing, on beyond pairing. Those who are regular watchers of the channel, those who know me, will remember that last week we had a session on how I learned to taste. This story here, this live stream here. So we're at TheChocolateLife.com here live. And if you haven't been and watched this particular live stream, what you may want to do is go and watch this live stream after, because there are some things that we can talk about which will make more sense if you have a chance to review the live stream. There's a lot of intertwining information about the way I approach things. And this learning to taste will give you really strong background and understanding for the approach that I'm going to be using. And I'm going to be talking about here today on this live stream about breaking pairing boundaries, on beyond pairing, whatever it is that we want to title it. If you're out there watching, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, please go into the chat, go into the comments. Let me know that you're watching. Let me know where you're connecting from, what part of the world, and I'll get you up on the screen for a shout out. And then please, at any point during the live stream, if you have a question or a comment or anything like that, just put it in the comments. We'll get your questions answered. No super chats. You don't need to pay any money or anything like that. Just let me know what it is you're thinking, and we can go on from there. All right. And so with no further ado, let's jump into on beyond pairing. And what I've done is I've gone into my browser and I've blown up this article, this post that I've written, so that you can get a better chance to read it. And what I wanted to point out is that my approach to pairing, I think, is, as you might have been able to guess from the other things that I talk about, is a little bit different from the way other people approach pairing. And what I want to do is I want to suggest it's not the only way to do it. I mean, it is another way to think about it. And perhaps that the thing to do is to take a look at what you are doing already and how this might complement what is you're doing. How does it expand your understanding of what you're doing? And before we go any further, I want to do a shout out to Teresa, who's calling in probably from Atlanta today. Teresa, thanks very much. Glad you could make it back to today's live stream. So what I want to start out with is this point here, is that every single one of us has our own sense of taste. Every single one of us has our own sense of smell. Each of us grows up in a different food culture. So I grew up in a household. One of my parents was Eastern European. My other comes from an Eastern European background. My mother came from an English background. They grew up in Los Angeles. They were both born in the early 1920s. And, I was a child in Southern California in the 1960s. And so my food culture represented this interesting mix of all of those different influences. And I was lucky in the sense that I grew up in a house where I never had white bread. I mean, the only time I had white bread was when I went to somebody else's house. I mean, there's no Wonder Bread or anything like that in the house. We did a lot of our own baking. We ate almost no processed food compared with what I saw my friends eating when I went to their houses. So I was very, very lucky. Well, I consider myself now to be very, very lucky. I did not know that as I was growing up, how important it would be. But that set of circumstances, my parents' background, where I grew up, when I grew up, all of those things influence what it is that I think about, the references and the memories that I bring to the way I think about flavor. And so think about those things for yourself. And when you're in a situation where you're working on pairing with other people, it makes sense to remember that everybody else in the room has a different set of experiences from you. They have a different background, they have a different understanding, they have different desires and motivations for being in the room in the first place. And that leads us to the 0th law of pairing, which is know your audience. And if anybody out there is a science fiction fan, they will recognize this is 0th law as an homage to Isaac Asimov's and his law of robotics. For many, many years, it was just the 3 laws of robotics. And then later on, Daniel Oliva, very, very far in the future, added the 0th law of robotics. So hope people caught that reference for you. And the 0th law of pairing is know your audience. I mean, I had a sort of embarrassing situation once when I was doing a chocolate and wine pairing at the Torch Club at New York University here in New York City. It was organized, the pairing class was organized by the James Beard Foundation and NYU's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. You know, when I walked in after spending all this time working with the wine steward and selecting the chocolates to be paired that evening, and I asked the people in the room what their favorite wines were, and somebody said, I think maybe perhaps more than one person said, White Zinfandel. And I realized that everything that I had prepared for that evening was not likely to work for at least one, if not more people in the audience. It's a very, very important, it was a very sort of humbling realization that I came to, is that I had made some assumptions about who my audience would be. And it turns out my audience, didn't meet my expectations. So understanding who your audience is to the point that you can is really, really important. All right. Now, I don't want to cast any aspersions on anybody who likes White Zinfandel. I mean, I don't have to drink it. Right. And so, okay. I mean, every once in a while I try. So I remember why I don't like it for the most part. But it has its place on a very, very hot sunny afternoon, maybe with some sparkling water thrown into it, maybe some fruit on the side. I mean, it does have a reason for existence, but I don't have to drink it. And there's never a point in which I'm thinking about, well, I'm going to look down at someone. So I'm going to try to demean someone or think that somebody is not a real wine lover or a real chocolate lover because they like something I don't like. That's not the point. What I may say is, and this is the realization that I came to as a result of that experience, is that this person may not be in a position to be interested in exploring what it is that I want to explore. They may not be open to it. They may not have the sensibilities in terms of their ability to taste, for example. Nothing, again, this is not a judgment. It's just a realization on my part that I need to be more careful. And I spent quite a bit of time in that tasting session, working around the fact that there were people in the room who would not like, from the very, very beginning, what it was that I was going to like. And that 0th law, know your audience, leads directly into the 1st law of pairing, which is as you're creating a pairing, when you're doing it for a group, whatever that group is, understand that no matter what you do, it's going to fail for someone in the room, right? So plan for that failure is an important aspect of that. So understand that, yeah, if you've got somebody, you're doing something with what you think of as an exotic flavor combination, perhaps maybe white chocolate and matcha green tea with crystallized lemon, right? There may be some people who just don't like green tea or don't like white chocolate, and they're going to have an aversion to what it is you're doing. And no matter what you pair it with, they're not going to like it, right? So every pairing that you construct is not going to work for someone. And so don't go in there with, I'm the expert. And because I'm the expert, I put these two things together, and you should like these things because I'm the expert and it's my sense of taste and I know what I'm doing. And you should like these things because I'm the expert. Right? What you want to do, in my opinion, the experience that I've had doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things over the past 20 some odd years, is create yourself a rubric for evaluation, right? And then present this rubric to the people in the group. So a rubric's just a set of rules for doing things. And the rubric that I use, and one of the reasons why I like to use it, is that it works equally well for chocolate and wine, chocolate and beer, cheese and chocolate, cheese and wine. Yeah, it works for pretty much everything, which is one of the reasons why I love to use it. Is ask yourself the question, and I'm going to phrase it in the context of wine right here, but it could wine and chocolate, but it could be anything. So does the combination of the wine and chocolate make the wine taste better? Right. So again, going back to the session on how I learned to taste, remember what we're doing is we're tasting something and smelling something and getting a sense memory for it. And then what we do is we put it down, and then we take up the next thing that we're tasting and we get a sense memory for it, whether it's 2 chocolates and 2 wines or chocolate and a wine. We want to have an independent impression of what these things are. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both of them in my mouth. And when you're working with chocolate and wine, as I mentioned in the tasting session, order is important. So if you put the wine in your mouth first and then put the chocolate in, you'll have one expression of the flavor, right? But if you put the chocolate in your mouth and then put the wine in your mouth, you'll have another expression of flavor. And so what my tendency to do is to put the chocolate in my mouth, get it completely melted. You want to make sure there's no lumps. Everything is completely melted. And especially if you're working with a cold wine, a white wine, you need to have the fat completely melted. And then introduce into your mouth the wine of roughly the same quantity of the amount of chocolate that you have. Right? So you want to make sure that one is not overwhelming the other. And then ask yourself, right, does the combination of the wine and chocolate make the wine taste better? Yes or no, right? Or does it make the wine taste worse? So for example, there may be a chemical in the chocolate which brings to the wine a bitterness. It might bring out an astringency or other sort of sensation. And while you might like the wine on its own, when you put the chocolate in your mouth, the combination of the two makes the wine taste worse, right? Or does it make the wine taste better? And then you want to ask yourself, in what ways does it make your the wine taste better, or the wine taste worse, or the chocolate taste better, or the chocolate taste worse? Right? You're getting people, you don't want to say, you don't want to go into specifics. You don't want to say, these are the flavors I've tasted. You don't want to get into the depths of it, but just general impressions about what it is that's going on. And what I found is focusing on, does it make it taste, does it taste better or worse, is a really easy thing for people to wrap their minds around, their tongues and their noses around as well. So then you ask yourself, okay, is the combination of the two together better or worse, right, than either of them on their own, which is a different question for, is the wine or the chocolate taste better, right? So does the combination does not make either seem better or worse. All right, so is the combination worse than each other in their own? The combination does not make either of them seem better or worse. Is the combination better than either on their own? So what you want to do from a pairing perspective is you want to evaluate the individual components and how they relate, and then the combination of the components and how they relate. So do I think that the combination of them is better or worse, right? Or they're sort of neutral. Really, really important ways to think about this, right? And as I said earlier, remember that order matters. So if you put your wine in your mouth first, especially if it's a cold wine and you get your mouth cold, and then you put the chocolate in your mouth, it's going to be crunchy and it's going to be harder melting. And if it's harder melting, the flavor and aromas are going to release more slowly. And it's going to be a very, very different perception that if you put the chocolate in your mouth first, let it melt, and then put the wine in your mouth. And this is a very, very simple rubric. This is the one I use when I'm sitting down in a group evaluating these things with people, is, well, what do I think about it? And what I want to do is I want to suggest that what you do is you focus on people who have very, very different impressions. So it's often the case where not everyone in the room will agree. And some people say, I love the combination. And some people will say, I don't like the combination at all. Right. And it is in that difference between two people, right, that what you do is you have an opportunity for exploration. So it's not all about me. It's not all about my taste. It's not all about what I think, right? What I'm doing is I'm presenting a way to think about pairing, a way to think about um, a way to think about consciously eating, right? So rather or tasting as opposed to just consuming, right? And giving people a set of tools that they can use going forward, right? Which is very, very different from the way most pairings are done. Is just, here are some things, and we'll give you a little bit of history about the chocolate, we'll give a little bit of information about the wine, but here are some things, yummy, 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 don't they taste together, right? And my approach in all of this is I want to give you a set of skills. I want to give the people that I'm in front of a set of skills that they can apply however they want to, right? Even if they're not consciously thinking about it, that they can move forward and use for any situation going forward, right? And having this rubric, having this way of thinking about things is a tangible tool that people can use. All right, so number one, know who your audience is if you're giving a pairing. Number two, just accept the fact that you're going to fail. Number three, or the second law of pairing, right, because we started at the 0th law, right, is forget conventional wisdom. So the conventional wisdom will tell you that red wine goes with meat, white wine goes with fish, rosé wine goes with fowl, and those will only take you so far. It may be the case that you will never have a horrible tasting experience if you follow the conventional wisdom. But it is, in my experience, your chances of finding something truly mind-blowing, something that really blows the socks off your feet, something that is just really quite exceptional, becomes much more difficult if what you're doing is you start off by being conventional. So the chocolate equivalent is that dark chocolate goes with red wine and sweet wines go with dessert. And when do you use white wine? Right? Right? And when do you use milk chocolate? Right? So think about that. So how would you think about using the second law in pairing? So you might say, can I construct a pairing where I have 2 different red wines and a dark chocolate, or 2 different red wines and a milk chocolate? And what I want to understand is the interaction of the chocolate with the wine. So this is an idea. So I have 1 chocolate and 2 wines. This question of, does the chocolate make the wine taste better? Does the wine make the chocolate taste better? Is an interesting exploration. Can I do a white wine and a dark chocolate? And the answer is you can absolutely have amazing pairings of white wine and dark chocolate. There's a fabulous Washington State vineyard by the name of Chateau Saint Michel. They make a Gewürztraminer, which is very slightly effervescent, so very slightly sparkling. It's not too sweet. Many people stay away from Gewürzes because they think they're too sweet, but a slightly sparkling, slightly effervescent Gewürz and many dark chocolates. But I won't say all dark chocolates because you have to say, is it a fruity dark chocolate? Is it a nutty dark chocolate? I mean, what are the particular flavor profiles of the chocolates, right? But get out of your comfort zone. It's not a matter of thinking outside the box. It's, and it's not a matter of throwing the box away. It's a matter of forgetting what boxes are. I mean, I was doing a tasting session last week. I was doing a tasting session last week, and it was a Scotch whiskey and a bunch of chocolates. And there was a specific pairing that we were walked through. So we had a tasting mat, and we had some chocolates, and we had 3 different whiskeys that we were pairing as a part of this. And it is my common tactic to not eat all the chocolate and not drink all the whiskey, and then start doing pairing combinations that are not the ones that the people who are giving the tasting want me to taste. That I'm there because I know myself well enough, and I'm confident in what it is that I'm doing. I will perhaps recognize something in one of the things that I'm drinking and go, ooh, this would be interesting with one of the things that I'm eating, and I'll do that pairing on my own, right? And I suggest that you do the same. That if you are given a set of things to pair and a way to pair them. So whoever is tasting the wine or tasting the chocolate gives you a specific way to do things, right? Step back and give yourself an opportunity to step outside the box that they're building around the tasting experience and go do something different, right? And it's really quite remarkable sometimes that I find often that given the opportunity to have those particular chocolates and those particular wines or spirits or beers or whatever it is, I would have made very different choices. And that's an avenue that I encourage you to explore, and then to encourage you to explore when you're working in front of students is, and reward it. If somebody's, sort of accidentally, not accidentally, but if somebody goes and does this anyway, don't knock them down. Go and reward them for initiative, right? Ask them to, and then ask if anybody else has done it. I mean, make it a point of conversation. I mean, even though you're upfront giving the presentation, it's not all about you. It shouldn't all be about you. You're about helping people understand what they like and why they like it and come to their own decisions, because in the end, they have to eat it, they have to drink it, you don't, right? And I think that, again, giving them a skill, right, is more important than trying to impart your wisdom, right? Except as the wisdom extends to being associated with the skill that you're trying to pass on to people. So that brings us to the third law of pairing, which is make it collaborative. Recognize that it is collaborative. It is not always about you. There should be a call and response. There should be just, let everybody know that there are no wrong answers. That, what you taste is what you're going to taste, right? I lead almost all of my tasting classes or pairing classes with that thing, the phrase that I led this one off with is every one of us has our own sense of taste. Every one of us has our own sense of smell. If I recognize there might be somebody who looks like they're from the country of India, I might say, you might have grown up with a particular kind of curry that your grandmother met, or, if I look at somebody who looks to be of Southeast Asian persuasion, I may, listen, you may have grown up with certain kinds of flavor combinations that you like, right? So and they're not mine, right? So I grew up in California in the 60s, and so I'm gonna have my own set of assumptions and use that. The connection. We're all people. We all smell. We all smell. We all smell food. We all taste food. Assumingly, we all have an interest in chocolate and wine or whatever it is we're there to do. Use that connection to explore the set of personal relationships that everybody in the room has with what it is they're doing. Because in the end, that's what it all comes down to. You're not there to persuade them that your taste is better than their taste. Really, really important in my opinion. It's collaborative. Just make sure that you're introducing yourself to people, right? And giving them the opportunity to speak, and making sure that no one is judgmental. You don't want anybody swatting anybody down because they say, oh, I like white Zinfandel, or I like white chocolate, for example, right? And for me, the fourth law of pairing, so we're going past the three laws of robotics plus the zeroth. The fourth law of pairing is keep it fresh. Right. And while you always want to make sure that the wine is not corked and you want to make sure that the chocolate is not bloomed or isn't over crystallized, I don't mean fresh in that sense. What you want to do as the person who's presenting the pairing is you want to keep it fresh for yourself, right? Which is, I did a series of classes over the course of a couple of years at Two Beans here in New York City. Unfortunately, they closed down, COVID. I was by there recently. And so New York City is down, one of the better chocolate consumption venues, and there are very few. I mean, it's ironic. New York City, when you think about it, it's not really known for its innovation compared with a company like Seattle or Portland or San Francisco. Or even Atlanta. I mean, New York is not a great chocolate city. It's really quite remarkable. But keep it fresh, which means that if you're doing chocolate and wine pairings or chocolate and beer pairings in front of other people, mix it up. Don't always use the same wines. Don't always use the same chocolates. Because if it becomes boring and stale for you, right, you already know all the answers because you've tasted all these things before. It's really difficult to make it interesting and fresh for the audience every single time. So, for example, when I was doing these things at Two Beans, they didn't always have the same wines. So I knew that I might want to have a Rioja, but it wasn't always the same Rioja. and they didn't always have the same chocolates in stock. I wanted to make sure when I was working with Two Beans that there were enough bars left over after I did the tasting so that people could walk downstairs and purchase one if they wanted to, right? So I didn't, while I had a preference, I went to them and saying, listen, do you have anything that's about to hit its expiration date, right? Let's use those preferentially because, in a week or two, you may not be able to sell them. So let's use them and see if we can get people to buy them. But I wanted to make sure that it was different for me every single time, that I was going to run into something unexpected every time. It was just as much a learning experience for me every single time. My tasting sessions, my pairing sessions would be, oh, if I had to go down and give a pairing using a pairing class, giving this set of wines and chocolates, for example, this is how I would do it, right? Rather than giving them a formulaic, I've tasted these things, they go good together. So keep it fresh for yourself. You can use the same style of wine, you can use the same style of chocolate. And I did. I had one white wine, I had one rosé wine, I had two red wines, I had two dark chocolates, I had a milk chocolate, I had white chocolate. I mean, that aspect of the format was always set. But which white wine, which rosé, which two reds, which two dark chocolates, which milk chocolate, which white chocolate. And the white chocolate often had an inclusion. So it might be chocolate with freeze-dried raspberries, or it might be white chocolate with this matcha tea and crystallized lemon. I mean, lots of creative opportunities to play there. But make it interesting for yourself. And if you can make it interesting for yourself, you have a much better chance of making it interesting for everyone in your audience, right? And again, you're also learning too, which is always great. You're showing your process. You're admitting, hey, coming up with good pairings is a process. And sometimes even the experts get it wrong. And we learn from our experiences and move on, and we'll do it better the next time. I mean, it's a fabulous way to go about and work with a room full of people who are going to be your friends by the time you get done with this, people you've most likely never met before, right? And again, what it is that you're doing then, what it is that I was doing, and really, really, really important to me, is that I was more interested in giving them a set of tools. So some skills that they could use, that they could take home with them and apply in future situations, right? Rather than my just giving them a pleasurable tasting experience where they got to taste some wine, they got to taste some chocolate, right? And they could make it, and that was the end of it. They didn't have anything in terms of learning, right, that they could use and apply going forward in their lives. Really, really important for me. And here we are, roughly halfway through the hour, which is about where I wanted to be. We've got a number of people watching. We got 3 likes. If you're watching, please like the video if you're on YouTube. That's where we see it. I am going to put a quick banner up as I take a quick break here to let you know that the live streams are shown on the Chocolate Wire channel on the Chocolate Life on YouTube. They are also on LinkedIn, on my personal profile, and on Facebook at the Chocolate Life channel on Facebook. So these are the places where you can see this after the fact. You can also always come to thechocolatelife.com. Again, here's the homepage. We're at this live stream right now. If you're not a member, please become a member, and you can go down and you can put things into the comments, right? Support what it is that I'm doing. Excuse me, but if you like and subscribe and share on YouTube, we can grow the channel, and you can help me that way. So I appreciate everybody who has done that, and looking forward to grow the audience in a bunch of different ways. So I'd also like to say, again, if you're out watching, I've only had one person tell me where they're from. So let me know where you're connecting from. I really, really would love to know that, your name. And I can see whether you're connecting from Facebook or someplace else. But what part of the world you're connecting from. Always interested in knowing where people are connecting from. And I have a regular visitor from Australia, which is a lot of fun as well. And maybe Jessica is in the room doing this. So what I want to do is spend the rest of the time we have together today talking about applying the pairing laws to chocolate confectionery, baking, and savory, and specifically the laws about forgetting conventional wisdom. I think that's the important part. And what I want to do is I want to give you experience by example. So I want to say, here are some things that I have done. Here are some of the ways that I have thought about things, and let's go play. And perhaps it will inspire you to think. And again, if anybody here has some ideas that you thought were out of the box, or you have some questions about, ooh, how do you make this particular pairing work? Please let me know. And because the reason why is, whoops, let's scroll up to the top, is I asked this question, and I'm going to ask it for everybody right now. I don't want anybody to post answers in the comments right now, but let's wait for another 20 minutes or so, and you can think about this, right? Which is, how would you pair anchovies and chocolate? Can you make anchovies and chocolate work? How would you do that? Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times over the course of Clubhouse and other live streams. So if you know my answer, please try to think of another answer. But given the question, if you had to pair anchovies and chocolate, how would you make anchovies and chocolate work? Now, we'll get back to that later on, right? So what I've done here is I've linked to 2 posts on the Chocolate Life, which talk about pairings that I have done. One is a beer and wine pairing in 2000, or beer and chocolate pairing that I did in 2017. I've done this several times, I think 2017, 2018, 2019, at Burp Castle, which is a great Belgian beer bar in New York City. They brought me in on Valentine's Day to give a tasting. People would walk in, buy a beer, and I would say, hey, it's Valentine's Day. Do you want some free chocolate to go with the beer? And the challenge is that I never knew until I showed up what beers would be on tap, right, that night. So they could give me the menu from the day before, but that doesn't mean they would have tapped out, and I would be able to guarantee what wines they had. So I literally had to go think about the chocolates in very, very general terms, thinking about styles of beer that might be served, not specific beers. So I knew there might be a Belgian sour ale. There might be, you get the idea. So I would think about things in general terms and try to get chocolates that would apply to things very, very generally. And I talk about that in this post, right? So I talk about this specific beer pairing and chocolate pairing that I did. And I mention the beers that were on tap, right? And particular chocolates that I chose for that. So you've got, and then I do descriptions, what it is that I liked about each one of those things. So you can get an idea of how I thought about things, right? And where I came to. So you'll see that we had 2 different milk chocolates, a Cho 53% milk, a Cho 39% milk. I bought the chocolates from 2 Beans. But the ESB is English Special Bitter. It actually has an IBU rating, which is down near 0. It's not bitter at all, but you've got the alcohol content in here. I talk about a Pilsner and a Belgian Blonde, and how the chocolates that I chose for that. What you'll do is you'll find, for example, here, let me scroll this up. You've got a chocolate from Milk Boy with pine essence. So you've got this resinous kind of quality, which would conflict with an IPA, not a whole lot of Belgian IPAs. But you get that hoppy, the pininess, which is reminiscent of many kinds of hops. And then the Pump Street Bakery 60% rye crumb. So again, rye has got this piney from the caraway or similar kinds of seeds that are in the bread, right? Which is an inclusion, right? Which I think is a fabulous thing. I mean, the French will think about, I'm going to take a piece of baguette, put some butter on some baguette, and then I'm going to grate some dark chocolate over the top of it. But the notion of putting the bread into the chocolate, I think, is just a really, really fabulous idea. And I really love what it is that Pump Street has done. Chris Brennan, has long been one of my favorite chocolate makers in the UK. Want to give a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce in Denver. Thanks, guys, for joining in again today. It's really, really, really satisfying to me to have you back in the room on a regular basis. I noticed after years there's still a typo in this. I keep finding typos. So an Allagash White. This is a New York State beer with a Bona from Mexico. And it turns out that I helped bring those beans from Mexico into, and I talked about this, why they were important to me, my history with them. A Belgian triple, a really a creme brulee stout. I mean, really heavy alcohol content. So here you'll get a really interesting, I think, interesting explanation of what it is that I tried to do. So I have here a just like a top of the line Belgian sour red ale. This Roderbach Grand Cru might be my favorite sour beer that I've ever drunk. I mean, it's really phenomenal. And then a dry cider. So again, here with a white chocolate with matcha and lemon. So it turns out that the crystallized lemon is sweet and sour, and it goes with the sourness of both the Rodenbach and the cider. The white chocolate is a little sweet. Just, the matcha has got this earthiness to it. Really wonderful combination. And that's what I would recommend. Just go give it a deeper dive read to get an idea of the way I approach these things and how I think about them and how I describe them to people. Another one that I did, I had the great good fortune of working with a woman by the name of Betty Coster, who's a friend of mine, who was a friend of a friend of mine. Betty is now a friend, but I met her through Case Rat at Metropolitan Deli in Amsterdam when I was working there. And I had a chance to do chocolate and cheese events with Betty and Case in Amsterdam, and then with Betty in New York, and then with Betty in San Francisco at the San Francisco Cheese School. And at the San Francisco Cheese School, I wrote this extended post about how Betty and I worked to create the pairings between the chocolates and the cheeses that were available to us. And then what the tasting plates looked like, and then what the table setting was, and what the wines were. I mean, if you ever get a chance to try this particular white wine, this Montgravé Sauvignon Blanc, Côte de Gascogne, not necessarily the 2016, of course, this is the one we had. This is a fabulous white wine, and it is a sort of this style, and this particular one is one of my favorite white wines for pairing with cheese and chocolate. It is just really versatile, right? So I really like it, and I like drinking it on its own as well. Really good. And I talk about the Roderbach Grand Cru, again, probably one of my favorite pairing beers of all time. But we talk about how we organized the curation process. So how we decided what to pair with what, right? There are, links to the websites, but then we also talk about how we did the pairings and how Betty and I thought about doing the pairings. So I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through. So pairings 1 through 4 was, if you remember, we call back to the learning how to taste. I did a 1 and 3 and 3 and 1. So we had 1 chocolate and 3 beers, and then 1 beer and 3 chocolates, for example. That's exactly what we did, but 1 chocolate and 3 cheeses, and then 1 cheese and 3 chocolates, right? Really interesting. And then we picked a wine to go with them. So again, how is the cheese affecting the flavor of the chocolate? How is the chocolate affecting the flavor of the cheese? And thinking about how different cheeses are going to have an effect. So I would recommend reading through this. It's going to give you very quickly a really strong idea about how I approach the idea of putting together pairings for classes and experiences. And if you want to, you can click through on this card to be able to go to the post if you want to go watch the live stream for learning how to taste. It's on YouTube and LinkedIn, on Facebook, and the links are on that page. So let's go back. So I hope people are thinking about how to pair anchovies and chocolate. What I want to do is I want to get sort of a little more, if I can, I don't know that personal is the right way to do it, but what I want to do is I want to suggest that one particular thing, which I think is most important, which is if you don't make mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. I mean, if you put two things in your mouth and they're always pleasant for you, you're not learning anything, right? It is in making the mistakes, it is pushing through the conventional wisdom and doing things that are not expected, which is where you'll be able to find just really, truly revelatory tasting experiences. And you'll be able to have a lot of fun with people. You can also start answering some really interesting questions, right? And trying to find answers for them. So for example, I was asked to do a chocolate dish at a craft beer and pork festival here in New York City a couple of years ago. And I did it a couple of different times. One was for something called Pig Island, and the other one was called Great New York Beer Experience or something like that. And I'm trying to figure out how am I going to put together chocolate with pork and beer in a way that made sense. And if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, I apologize for that offense. But if you can, think about it. And so for this particular event, I asked myself an interesting question, which had to do about how would I present something? Because almost everything else that was being served was going to be served hot. So is there a way to serve something hot, right? Rather than just, a piece of chocolate on a cracker or something like that. And so I ended up asking myself the question. So yeah, fondue makes sense. I could make a chocolate fondue, and I could think about, putting pork into chocolate fondue. But the beer component was something that sort of eluded me. And so I asked myself the question, what are cream and butter? What are cream and butter? And fundamentally, cream and butter are emulsions of fat and water. Right? So I should be able to take pretty much any fat, right, and any liquid and put them together in the right ratios, and they would behave like they were melted butter, right? So butter is a saturated fat, which means it crystallizes, gets cold at room temperature or colder, and so you'd want to use a saturated fat for this for the most part. And hey, pork fat is a saturated fat. So I said, what if instead of using milk or cream and butter to make my fondue, what if I used the fat from rendered bacon, right, and beer? So could I make a chocolate fondue using bacon fat and beer? And not only that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take really thick cut bacon and get them into really nice lardons. So I've got, the crunchy, chewy meat parts and the silky, fatty parts, right? So I got this really, really wonderful contrast and texture going on in the bacon. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to deglaze the pan I'm cooking the bacon in with beer. So I'm going to get sort of the cooked bacon, warm beer. So I'm making a beer, bacon, and chocolate fondue, right? Just by asking the question, what are cream and butter? And what can I do to replace the cream and butter in a fondue? And then, of course, what we did is we took the bacon lardons and we dumped them. That's what we dipped into the chocolate to serve it to people. This dish is so wrong in so many ways, right? But it really works remarkably well, right? And so asking yourself a simple question about the ingredients that you're using can open up entire avenues of creative experimentation when you think about pairing. So we haven't just thrown the box away, we've forgotten what the boxes are here. And I think that's a really, really fabulous example of thinking about pairings in very, very different ways. I mean, another pairing that I did, which I think fits into that same model, is for a number of years, I was asked to do really high-touch chocolate tastings during open houses for multi-million-dollar apartments here in New York City. So there'd be an open house 4 or 5 hours long. There'd be very high net worth individuals, because these are like 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 million apartments. They'd be coming in, and there'd be an experience. People would be drinking Prosecco. I brought in a tempering machine and a melter and lots of ingredients, and I would construct things for people a la minute, right? And as part of the experience of being there, number one is the people who came to these things would remember who the real estate agent was and the agency was, right? But it put them in a really, really open frame of mind. And so my goal was, I thought that was a pretty interesting marketing tactic to do that from the agency. So I want to come up with something which is new and interesting and different. And I didn't really have the opportunity to do the beer, bacon, chocolate fondue. I didn't have the cooking capabilities. I couldn't make that kind of mess in the kitchen of the apartment that was being displayed, right? But I said, what are some other things that we might be able to do? And so you can go back and you can think about just sort of some basic kinds of lessons you might learn in culinary school, especially if you've gone to pastry school. One of which might be, what you want to do is you want to complement in flavor and contrast in texture. So get a different texture element to provide, for example, a crunchy or a chewy experience, which is very, very different, right? And then try to work with flavor components that appear to go interestingly well. And so one of the things that I created, sounds really crazy, is I made a version of a sushi temaki, right? But what I did is, rather than use nori, so seaweed, as the wrapper, I used bresaola, which is an air-dried beef, very, very thinly sliced bresaola. And I got them to cut it so I could roll it into wrappers. And inside the bresaola, I put a really, really herbaceous goat cheese. So it's called four vert. It's not available all the time, but it's my favorite goat cheese in the world. It also has some pink peppercorns on it. So every once in a while, there's a real hint of acidity and heat, as well as the herbs. So you'd put the bresaola in your hand. You'd put a little bit of goat cheese. In the middle of it, you'd put a couple of leaves of baby wild arugula into that, and then some shavings of dark chocolate. And you'd wrap it up into a hand roll, a little cone, and you'd hand it to somebody for consuming. And number one is they're going, well, if I think about a charcuterie board, I can imagine that there being meat, and I can imagine there being cheese, and I can imagine putting cheese on meat on a charcuterie board. That makes a lot of sense, right? Sometimes I'll have goat cheese on top of a salad. So goat cheese on arugula, that makes a lot of sense. What's interesting there is the chocolate. Now, what you're not doing there is you're not putting enough chocolate on to overwhelm, but you're using it to take the chocolate and sort of broaden out fat, right? And maybe some bitterness, but there's some sweetness to counteract the bitterness of the arugula, and to counteract some of the goatiness of the goat cheese, right? You've got the soft chew of the bresaola, you've got that unctuousness of the goat cheese, the bitterness, fresh bitterness of the arugula, and the chocolate going on. And it's a fabulous combination, right? It may not sound like a fabulous combination, but I can tell you that if you get really good bresaola and really good goat cheese, and you've got really fresh arugula, and you put the shaved chocolate on it, not only is it a conversation starter, but it is a truly remarkable piece. And I've used it as an amuse-bouche in some presentations that I have done. So I've been asked to do catering for events, and this is one of the things that I've had made for me to do those. So think about things that you might normally make, like a little hand roll, and what can I do to incorporate different textures and different flavors within the context of that particular thing. Now, taking that another step further, you might want to ask yourself, okay, what is a classic French sauce? So let's think about a béarnaise or something like that. All right, so a classic French sauce, think of the classic French mother sauces. All of them have some amount of butter in them, right? And you can ask yourself the question, what happens if I replace some of the butter in a beurre blanc, for example? What happens if I replace some of the butter in a beurre blanc with cocoa butter, right? Or if could I replace some of the butter in a beurre blanc with chocolate? So could I make a bittersweet chocolate beurre blanc? And the answer is absolutely you can. You can replace up to 50% of the butter, the dairy butter in a recipe with cocoa butter and or chocolate, right? And you can make yourself this fabulous sauce. I've done this with pan roasted snapper. So a bittersweet chocolate beurre blanc on a pan roasted snapper. Really, really, really wonderful. Again, pick the chocolate. You've got the acidity of the beurre blanc from the vinegar. You've got the earthiness of and the sweetness which comes from the shallots. So you're not looking for an acid chocolate. You're not looking for an overly sweet chocolate. You probably don't want anything which is fruity. So you're thinking about a chocolate which is fairly neutral in chocolate terms to put in there. It provides a richness and a depth and complexity in the beurre blanc, as well as adding a color. You could use white chocolate if you wanted to. A little sweet, so you need to think about a way around that. But you've just created this really, really interesting experience, and it's fabulously tasty. So, okay, classic French butter sauce. And one of the French, I mentioned a Béarnaise, I mentioned a beurre blanc, but another one you can use this technique for is a hollandaise. So, I have done a hollandaise sauce for asparagus, or a hollandaise sauce for Benedict, right? And made a white chocolate hollandaise. Now, you can't use a lot of the white chocolate. It does provide some sweetness. You might use a little more cayenne pepper than you would normally use. So there are some adjustments that need to be made. And so think about that, all right? Can I take a classic French sauce and deconstruct it and use chocolate or cocoa butter in some way? And so look around you as you're doing things in the kitchen, and I'm using fats in particular kinds of ways. Are there alternatives for replacing a fat in a recipe with cocoa butter or chocolate? And it turns out there are lots of different ways that you can get this. You can make that. You can make that switch, all right? I reach back and I think about the history of what it is that I've done, and I've been very, very lucky. I've worked with the World Pastry Forum and the World Pastry and National Pastry Team Championships for close to a decade, and had a chance to work with some absolutely amazing pastry chefs and absolutely amazing people working in chocolate. So Jean-Pierre Vibau, Jean-Philippe Maury, Jacques Therese, Norman Love. I mean, people all over the spectrum in terms of what their approach to flavor was and their skill level was and what they were looking for. And this is one of the reasons why I think you need to be just a Catholic taster, Catholic in the original sense of being universal. I mean, you need to eat everything and you need to evaluate it and say, ooh, what would I do differently? Or, how does this match up to my idea of what this is? And one of the things that I did that's very interesting, and it's something that I suggest that every single one of you do when you get the opportunity, and this is something I did once at the World Pastry Forum and once at the Origin Chocolate event in Amsterdam with Case Rat, is I've done tasting events where we ask the question, what is lemon? Right. And of course, we did a little bit of differently if we're going to a consumer audience as opposed to a class of pastry chefs. But when a chef thinks of lemon, when I think of lemon, what do I mean by lemon? So I'm thinking of a big yellow lemon. Am I thinking of a Meyer lemon? Am I thinking about lemon compound? Am I thinking about lemon flavoring? Am I thinking about lemon extract? What am I thinking about when I think about lemon? Right. And then think about, how does the expression of that lemon flavor change, right, by the addition of fat? So if I make a lemon custard or lemon curd, as opposed to putting lemon into a ganache, how is that going to affect the expression of the lemon flavor, right? What's going to happen if I've got this in an ice cream or a sorbet? Again, here's a sorbet versus a gelato, for example, different levels of fat, but they're both cold. If I use the same lemon, what is the difference between those things, those two expressions of lemon, right? If I do something which is very, very warm, like I do an avgolemino, a soup, right? Which is very, very, we've got a lot of lemon in it, or lemon chicken. Ask yourself the question, what is lemon? When I think about strawberry, what is it that I mean when I say strawberry? What is that flavor? Apple. I mean, not only are there lots of different ways of preparing apple, and I can buy apple flavoring and ingredients in lots of different forms and formats and extract methods and all this kind of stuff, right? I also have the heat and the cold associated with it, but then I have hundreds of different varieties of apples to choose from. And so I'm making a recipe with a Granny Smith as opposed to a Fuji, as opposed to a Pink Lady, as opposed to, you choose it, right? That's going to have an impact on what it is that I'm doing. And think about these things consciously, make the decisions, and experiment, explore, try 3 different kinds of apples in the same recipe, or 4 different kinds of strawberries, or buy different essences and different extracts, right? And I think that one of the best ways to think about approaching this idea, again, from a chocolate and confectionery perspective, right? And it's the last thing I want to talk about before we go to the anchovies and chocolate question, was to talk to you about single origin. So when most people think about single origin, right, the only thing they're thinking about is the origin of the cocoa beans. So I'm going to do a single origin Venezuelan as opposed to a single origin Colombian, as opposed to a single origin Ecuadorian, as opposed to something else. And maybe I'll get to the farm level, and maybe I'll be able to get to the varietal level. But really, when I think about single origin, I think about cocoa beans. And if you're working in confectionery and chocolate, I think you need to expand your horizons broadly. So I was first twigged onto this idea, I want to say 2017, 2018. I was in London for the London Chocolate Show. And a gentleman I'd never met before, his name is Peter Swenningen, or Svenningsson, who is a good friend of Mikkelfors Holmes, is a confectioner. And he was using Mikkel's chocolate and brought chocolates that he had prepared for a tasting with him to the show. And what he had presented, what he had prepared for presentation, was a trio of water ganaches. Right. So yeah, so some people like to use water as opposed to cream because cream has a flavor, and cream and butter might interfere with the flavor of the chocolate. And if you're using water, then the expression of the chocolate flavor is more pure, right? Makes sense. And you can use water just as you'd use cream or butter. No problem doing that. But what Peter did is he used the same recipe for the ganaches for all 3 of his bonbons. But what he did is he used a different water. So one of the waters was an Arctic water, incredibly pure. One of the waters came from South Africa, and it was sort of medium in terms of its minerality and total dissolved solid contents and what those chemicals were. And then a third one, which it came from somewhere in Eastern Europe, which, if you took the top off the bottle, even if it wasn't carbonated, it would start fizzing. And there was sediment in the bottom of the bottle, really heavily mineral in terms of its flavor profile. And all 3 of the bonbons, right, as you might imagine, were totally different. They were all totally different, not because they used different cocoa, right, but they used different waters. And so one could think of those as single origin watered ganaches, right? Oh, wow. That's really interesting, right? So when you think of single origin, I would recommend, right, that what you do is you think about other ingredients which you could make as the focus of the origin. The one that pops out to mind immediately, whether you're doing a chocolate bar or you're doing a confection with a ganache or something, or caramel or something like that, is do a Tahitian vanilla, a Madagascan vanilla, and maybe a Mexican vanilla. All 3 of those vanillas have very different flavor profiles and will give you a very different result in the finished product. Same chocolate recipe is the same for all 3 of them. What's different is the expression of vanilla, and you're giving an opportunity for people to explore the different flavors of vanilla in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do, except if they went and they saw, I'm at the store and I noticed that there are bottles of extract, right? And I noticed that I have a couple of different origins of those bottles of extracts. But when you think about single origin, think about the origin of the flavorings that you're using. So we talked about a little bit about apples. Could you do a Fuji apple versus a Granny Smith versus a Pink Lady apple, for example? How would that express itself as the difference? Could I do different cinnamons, right? Absolutely, you could do different cinnamons. Let's say you're doing something like hazelnuts. Well, I know they grow hazelnuts in Turkey. I know they grow hazelnuts in Italy. I know they grow hazelnuts in Oregon. I could use origin hazelnuts to make different products. Coffee is another single origin product. I got four identical products, but I'm going to use maybe the same coffee roasted 3 different ways, or I'm going to use 3 different coffees, right? All sorts of ways to experiment with the notion of single origin, right? And that idea of single origin, and move the focus away from the origin of the cocoa to the origin of the other things that are going to be in the chocolate that you're going to be making and selling to people, right? So expand your notion of single origin is the last bit of applying the pairing laws to chocolate and confectionery that I'm going to suggest today. I go off on that tangent all the time. I just look at things and I'm going, oh my gosh. I mean, I just love the idea of experimenting and playing with those things. So what I would like to do is I don't think anybody has put a comment on the Chocolate Life. Nope, nobody. Oh, let me reload it. Nobody has commented on the Chocolate Life. Nope. Nobody has put an idea for pairing anchovies and chocolate. And we're at that time. We're at the end of the hour. And so if you're watching YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you have an idea for pairing anchovies and chocolate, please put them into the comments right now. Get them to me. I'll wait a minute or so that people can have an opportunity to get their brains going and thinking about chocolate and anchovies and how you might go about making that work. I'm going to turn the banner off. Just a quick reminder, today's sponsor is TheChocolateLife.com. If you like what it is we're doing, please join The Chocolate Life, like and support us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If you have the opportunity to join The Chocolate Life and you like what it is we're doing and like to financially support, click on the join button and become a paid member, a premium member of The Chocolate Life. All is good. All is going to be really appreciated. Okay, chocolate and anchovies. So Jeffrey is checking in from California. I did say anchovies and chocolate. Thanks for reminding me. We have the world of chocolate, El Mundo del Chocolate. So thanks for joining us. I appreciate your being here today. So Jeffrey, where others may go and create an ant ganache for the UCI anteaters. My father used to teach at UCI. I've been on that campus many, many, many times for the anteaters. So the idea of using ants and different kinds of ants is a great idea. Many people are squeamish about the idea of ants. It may become a large part, ants and other insects may become a large part of the protein supply in the next couple of years. So the flavor bought the ganache. Well, yeah, you had to add raspberry to it for a second flavor. Yeah, so the answer there for shock appeal and for a texture for me, that's what I get out of them. Usually they're pretty heavily dried and they're crunchy. So I can see that. Putting raspberry in them, yeah, to make them palatable, I can get. El Mundo, there's a chocolate with anchovies in northern Spain. Never tasted it, not been to bar. Right, so a chocolate with anchovies, I mean, are we talking anchovies in chocolate? I don't know how that works. I've had people who put chocolate on top of dill pickles. I mean, I love dill pickles. I love chocolate. I have yet to find a dill pickle and chocolate combination which is anywhere near close to being interesting, or chocolate and a sweet pickle, like a cornichon. Cornichons aren't necessarily sweet, but they're not as sour as dill pickle. Yeah, Jeffrey. So here is where just a focus on anchovies and chocolate, I think, gets you in trouble, right? And where, throwing the box away and just casting your eyes far afield can be a lot of fun. So let's make a batter, and the batter has cocoa powder in it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to throw potatoes in there. So we're going to make French fries. We're going to make battered French fries. But those battered French fries are cocoa flavored. I know I said chocolate, but we're using cocoa. So I have French fries with cocoa batter on them, deep fry them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an aioli with anchovies in it, right? And I'm going to dip the cocoa battered French fries into the anchovy aioli. And that's the way I have found to connect chocolate and anchovies together. And hopefully, one of the things you'll go, yeah, I know Labor Day was yesterday, and I don't have the barbecue kit out, but I need to go find a way to make anchovies and chocolate work for me. And if you have a deep fryer and you want to have fun, try that idea. Try making a cocoa battered French fry and making an anchovy aioli, and tell me what you think about the combination. I would love to hear what you have to say. And I would love to have, response, any kind of comment you'd like to make, whether the comment was here live, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, or whether you want to go to TheChocolateLife.com and make a comment there. You have to be a member, but free members can comment. Make a comment on this post, number 57. Please let me know. I'm really, really excited to understand for you to tell me what some of your most interesting combinations of chocolate and some other food that you've come up with. I would just really be intrigued to know the kinds of flavor combinations that you all put together. So as I mentioned, I do a post for every single live stream. And this is the one for today. But there is a calendar. Oops, where is it? There's a calendar post. So if I go to the Chocolate Life homepage, there's a calendar post. And there, what you'll do is you'll find future scheduled live stream. So this coming Friday, for several months, I've been talking about doing a deep dive on roasting, and I'm going to do that on Friday. We've done deep dives on melangers and sugars and other kinds of things. I'm going to do Tuesday, September 13th. I'm going to dive back into ethical and sustainable really shortly. This whole thing around Tony's and the International Labor Organization and ethical and sustainable and slavery is really bothering me. And so I'm going to do some research on the idea of slavery. I'm going to talk about, but is it really slavery? And what does that mean? I'm going to be traveling to Arizona on the 14th which is next Wednesday, and I'll be there for a week, visiting with some family and some colleagues as well. And so I'm going to do a live remote from somewhere in Arizona on Friday the 16th. But I'll be flying on Tuesday, September 20th, so there will be no live stream on the 20th. So that's the schedule for the next week or so, and I hope to see you on the Chocolate Life Live here. All right, sharing some of your time with me. So Teresa says she made a yellow curry vanilla ice cream that was delish. So you made a vanilla ice cream and then put yellow curry over the top. Okay, I can totally see, depending upon the curry, how that would work. And I'm prepared to say if I'm ever in Atlanta, you're making this for the next. Oh, not if I'm ever in Atlanta. The next time I'm in Atlanta and you want to make this for me, I am there. All right. And with that, I think that's a great way to end today's live stream with my regular sign off, which is no, made them together in the ice cream maker. So okay. You said hot and cold. And so I was confused. Hot and cold. Oh, spicy hot. Gotcha. Okay. Now that makes sense. But in any event, I'm really, really excited to try them. I hope you can tell, as I say, that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until next time, everyone, ciao.